Pokemon started out as a series that was a simple pocket monster collecting game. It was literally called that in Red and Green's early development cycle. But this tiny idea would create a juggernaut of a brand and a cultural phenomenon. What they were able to create on such a tiny cartridge was honestly insane. Back in the day, Pokemon has been considered critically as one of Nintendo's flagship series. And it was commercially a juggernaut as well, it hasn't changed. But critically, some of the games have a different identity these days. They've definitely took an interesting turn. I've been playing these games for way too long, and I'm sure you have too. So I'm sure some of you have seen it. You could say Pokemon has gone through many evolutions throughout the years. Oh dear, am I starting off with a cringy pun? Yes, this is honest content, baby. To be real, I know some people are probably looking at the title and thinking, gee, you must really hate Pokemon. You gotta be praying for Game Freak's downfall, right? Actually, no. It's the exact opposite. The very first video game I've ever beaten was Pokemon Emerald. And yes, I'm a Gen 3 fanboy. Give me trumpets and bury me out in Route 134. I'm gonna love it. I don't care about the water. I've been playing the game since I was basically a fetus. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not someone that holds on to things that have, you know, from my childhood or have any value, or I don't really have any collectibles or anything like that. But the only thing that I have from my childhood is this. Yeah, it's literally a plush of my favorite Pokemon, Torchic. It shows how much of a Pokemon fanboy I truly am is I still own this thing, and I don't have anything else from my childhood, but this is the only thing I have. But yeah, I'm no fake fan. I don't know why I have this, but I do. I probably will always have it in some way. So, to a lot of people, their favorite gens are usually going to be between Gen 1 to Gen 5, which is kind of ironic. For years, when I was growing up, people dismissed Gen 3 and everything onward, which was kind of sad as a kid like me who grew up with Gen 3. It was immediately dismissed for, oh my god, too much water and the horns are annoying, and I can't use my Gen 1 Pokemon, wah, wah, wah. But actually, looking back, this was sort of Pokemon's golden period for a lot of fans, which in reality, I do love Gen 1 and 2, but I would much rather play the remakes of those regions that I think do those games so much more justice than, you know, play a lot of the older versions, especially of Red and Green, for example. I mean, just look at these sprites. I mean, they definitely haven't aged well, have they? Goofy sprites. Looking at you, coughing. But to be real, those games were integral to making Pokemon the size of what the series truly is today. Now, we're at a period where people are growing older, and the people that grew up with Gens 3 and 5, like me, I'm in no way trying to sound like I'm hating on Pokemon's more recent games because I grew out of the series, or the fact that just my games were better, haha, hold your L. Alright, I'm a little more self-aware. It's not really coming from a place of negativity. Here's even my Pokemon games tier list, and yeah, I'm sure you can tell which gens I like the most. Now, when Pokemon was creating gens back in the day, it legitimately took more time than it does today. It would sometimes be on average 3 to 4 years in between each gen. As things have gotten closer to the modern day, it's been more closer to almost being 2 to 3 years. I mean, which is fine. In the end of the day, more new games means more money, right? Instead of wasting their time making a lot of amazing spin-offs like they maybe did back in the day, they could just make the next Pokemon Purple and Brown. But the problems with some of these newer games will start to pull their head out of the ground, and it's money, baby. It's such a successful franchise, being able to print money almost on anything with Pokemon's name on it. Basically at the point where a Pokemon game has to come out every year. In my opinion, this has been a big problem in Pokemon's modern gens. This sort of started in Gen 6, where they would tailor the games to a more casual audience, and to be frank, that totally makes sense. But these people are actually people that are gonna buy your game. But in my opinion, it was a huge step down to having the difficulty option from past Pokemon games like Gen 5 be completely removed. And Gen 6 would not only introduce one of Pokemon's most broken mechanics, and then they would make some of the easiest Pokemon games of all time. I know most of the bosses in the game don't even use Mega Evolution. Like, what's the balance here? I can use Mega Evolution, but they can't use Mega Evolution? And the Elite Four doesn't even use Mega Evolutions. Like, what are we doing here? I get a Speed Boost Blaziken, and then I get a Gen 1 starter that also can Mega Evolve, and okay, but they can't? Pokemon appealing to this crowd has been an overall positive and a negative, because sure, the games are appealing to a wider audience and they're selling more copies, but the games have just become way too easy in my opinion. And I haven't even mentioned the experience share mechanic. Even Greninja, who's the starter Pokemon, who's probably one of the most broken starters ever. I did like Greninja though, I did use him, I'm not gonna lie, he had the best design. Or even the lack of post-game that's started around Gen 6. Like seriously, I think this gen was robbed of Pokemon Z because the story elements that were honestly had to be ported over to Sun and Moon just were never really figured out even to this day. There's a lot of Gen 6 questions that are just never answered. I believe the Gen 3 remakes were actually solid when it came to expanding the original lore and balancing the games better and actually allowing trainers to have Mega Evolutions. And the Delta episode was a nice replacement for lacking the Battle Frontier, which technically was only in Emerald anyways, but the Delta episode was kind of cool, it definitely slaps. I mean, look at this music, so good. This boss fight, amazing. I wasn't really the biggest fan of Z moves, and to be honest, I just wasn't a huge fan of the roster in Sun and Moon. I thought it was interesting that how they changed the gyms and the story changes. Gym leaders were completely removed. These things felt like a step forward to the concept of Pokemon, but I still wasn't the biggest fan of Sun and Moon. I don't really hate the games, but I just didn't really click with them that much as previous games, and that's honestly fine. If you like Sun and Moon, I totally get it. Now this is where things start to get spicy. Pokemon couldn't maintain being in sprite form forever. The 3DS era too was ending. Where in the past they could just use the limitations of the console to benefit their own art styles and sort of have your brain fill in the blanks at times, when you move to a full-fledged console-grade game, there's different expectations. Even the spin-off games had some pretty interesting expectations that were actually pretty good back in the day. These games looked great. Even though they were reusing a lot of assets from Pokemon Stadium, I really love Colosseum and XD, even though their difficulty is definitely whack, but I love it in a weird way. I just always go back to it. To a lot of people, they are expecting a Pokemon Colosseum or XD level quality in the battle engine, and people are kind of hoping that to be at least met. It's pretty crazy, a tech demo of Pokemon Battle Revolution looks better than anything I've seen Pokemon do in the Switch era. Which I want to talk about this trailer for a second. This was in 2006 or something? Like, this was in the mid-2000s? Like, look at the level of detail in this trailer. There's giant explosions, debris, animations that aren't even in the game. But okay, you know, it is a trailer at the end of the day, but it's hard to make animations for every single Pokemon, and I know it's hard to make a game look this good, but what if we had this Pokemon game in 2024? This would be amazing. I know it's actually hard to make Pokemon animations for every single Pokemon in the game. I mean, we're almost at 1,000 Pokemon or something at this point. There's so many. There's hundreds of Pokemon. If you look at Stadium and you look at XD, a lot of the games are reusing assets from past games. The spin-offs are building off of the previous games. Even some of these Pokemon games have old models. They have some charismatic animations and they truly had a lot of charm. Where in the Switch era, we just got, yeah. Now I know some updates have come out and they have fixed a lot of these things in some of these games, which is great. It is a step forward, but it definitely, you know, doesn't really help the game at launch. Now, out of all the games on the Switch era, I like Legends Arceus the most, as it was actually doing something creative with a brand new story and evolutions. I also really like Ursaluna. This is just such a based Pokemon, just so broken. Thank you, Ursaluna, for beating the game for me. This game gets very hard at the very end, so yeah, Ursaluna like came in clutch for me. So shoutouts to Ursaluna, guys. Yeah, I was complaining about Pokemon games being way too easy, and the final battle in this game was like, yeah, just hold my beer. This seems like a natural step forward to the franchise in some ways. However, for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I liked parts of the game. I think its current form is a decent Pokemon game. It's a car you buy at the used car lot, maybe, you know, off the side of the interstate. You stare too far, you're gonna find some blemishes though. And boy, there's definitely plenty of blemishes. Entering the Switch era, they had a lot of challenges, and this led to a lot of positives and negatives. Some of the problems that were in past Pokemon games actually continued in Sword and Shield, like making the games way too easy. Why does the Elite Four only have 4 Pokemon on their team? It makes the battles become super forgettable, and it's like you're mashing the A button continuously just to end this. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't like Sword and Shield. I never even bought the DLC, which is really rare for me to do. I've never played it to this day. Personally, I didn't like the fact that basically the point of the post-game is just, you know, not a part of this main Pokemon games anymore. They'd much rather cut out the post-game and make it DLC later. And from a business standpoint, you know, I do have a business degree, I understand that. But I can't help but feel that I'm getting cheated at the same time that the DLC has come out and I've actually pretty much lost my interest for the game at that point because it'll take sometimes a year later for the DLC to come out. The annoying thing is previously we're spending $40 for a Pokemon game depending on the game. Let's say you're buying it for the DS. You could visit multiple regions and you had the Battle Frontier, heck, you even had the Delta episode, which was pretty good even for Gen 6. That was definitely a W. Looking back, it feels depressing that Sword and Shield without DLC, you beat the game and boom, that is it. It sucks. It truly feels like a step back and a much more limiting experience. We were spending $40 for much more content, and that's not a conspiracy, it's just the truth. Where on the Switch era, you're paying $20 more for a game with no post-game and overall less content, especially with the aspects of the previous games being put behind a paywall. And look, I get it from a business standpoint again. And also I understand that most players don't make it to the end of the game, so they thought of it as, hey, why not we worry about this stuff later? But it still hurts overall, I think, especially as a longtime fan. I mean, if you compare this to Heart Gold and Silver, it's just like, man, what happened here? And speaking of, I saved the best for last. These games were my most wanted Pokemon games for a long time. When ORAS came out, we all knew what was coming next. Gen 4 remakes. My literal second favorite gen. This is a pretty damn near perfect gen, and that's Generation 4. Some of the franchise's peaks are in this gen as far as quality goes. There's rumors that Pokemon was going to move forward to the Nintendo Switch, and oh boy, we're gonna get Gen 4 remakes on the home console, baby. It's gonna be great. Oh, crossing my fingers, right? Okay, we all know though. We're gonna see the Distortion World in 3D, I cannot wait. Gen 4 is a special place in my heart, and I'm sure it's in a lot of special places in your guys' hearts too. These remakes are nothing short of a cash grab just to hit a deadline. They weren't even made with heart and soul, pun intended. Let's just push this boulder past the finish line and get some more juicy Christmas Pokemon profit going. I remember people hating on ORAS for not having the Battle Frontier, but hey, at least we got the Delta episode that sort of made up for the lack of content later on. The Gen 4 remake said, oh, that extra content? You want extra content? No, you're not getting any at all. You want a new way to experience Gen 4? You kind of get that, right? Look, I'm not hating on the potential of the game's art style. It should not have been tried on the Gen 4 remakes everyone has insane expectations for. Did it meet those expectations? They remake Diamond and Pearl, sure they did, but it's the equivalent of turning in a 30-page essay you wrote the night before and calling it a day. Most remakes have extra content, whether it's the Sevi Islands all the way back in Fire Red, the Battle Frontier, a whole region. Remember when games had 2 regions in it? And then Diamond and Pearl remakes have nothing from Platinum, no Distortion World, no Battle Frontier, and you pay us $20 more, please. I know they're technically not a remake of Platinum, but everyone and their mom loves Platinum and the story elements that were added to this game. Why wouldn't you want to reuse those things as, you know, they're pretty awesome? And because they wanted to make a Gen 4 remake in time for Christmas, they couldn't really do that within Game Freak's schedule because they have countless other Pokemon games they're juggling at the same time, like Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, you get it. So they pulled a Call of Duty and outsourced the Gen 4 remakes to another company. And they did what they could. They basically made the Pokemon game have a chibi art style and somehow making the games more buggy than the original. The games are very messy if you look deeply into them. They're like that used car analogy I used earlier. I'm not trying to sound like a jerk, but these remakes are really disrespectful to the actual fans who were looking forward to an expanded experience here, especially compared to the previous remakes. Were our expectations too high? You know what, maybe they were. Remakes were home runs in the past. You know what, maybe our expectations were in the wrong place. But as someone who is dreaming of seeing Gen 4 on the Switch, this is not what I expected at all. I would have settled if the games heavily borrowed from ORAS. That would have been completely fine, or even Sword and Shield. But at least give the game its own identity. You just get more bang for your buck if you just bought Platinum back in the day for $40 and now you pay more money to literally get a worse product, which, yeah, it sucks. I really don't like these games. They are seriously a low point in the series in my opinion. Jeez, just look at them. Bunch of this concept art that leaked. Wow, what the heck happened here? Where was this game at? I would have bought this game right here. What happened to this? It's pretty clear they were putting their assets in Legends Arceus at the time. However, they had to sacrifice one remake in order to make another game, which does kind of suck, and that goes to show what happens when you have so many projects balancing at the same time. Profitability, I guess, you gotta hit those Christmas release goals, baby. It's almost like a wise man said, a finished game is much better than a game that's not finished. Apparently, Game Freak has woke up from their mistakes, and there's rumors that they have no plans of working with this company ever again. However, Game Freak isn't doing much better on their own either. Plenty of Game Freak's tactics are starting to catch up with them, and there's been past employees reviewed the company very poorly in these past couple of years, talking about how the company has non-stop crunch, and I mean, it's the game industry. Crunch is unfortunately a big part of it, and they're clearly doing it to themselves when it comes to, you know, pooping out every Pokemon game every fourth quarter. I'm not trying to say it's the dumbest strategy in the world, it's literally working for them from a money standpoint, but every time you make more and more profit, even the Gen 4 remakes, for how lazy and half they are. I've literally played ROM hacks that have more content than this game does, yet you have to pay for it. They sold a lot of copies of these Gen 4 remakes, like them or not. But this is the Call of Duty problem. If you remember Call of Duty, how glamorous the games were, now obviously they still are profitable to this day, but the series is a shadow of its former glory. It's even starting to hurt from its own series profitability more recently, as they've done some similar things like, you know, making Call of Duty games almost every single year, outsourcing them to other companies, so on and so forth. I feel like long term this starts to catch up to you, and you can only do it for so long. But if this product starts to damage the brand, I fear that this chasing the dollar sign mindset, the grind set, is potentially gonna hurt Pokemon long term. If you look at the Zelda games, they took years to make Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but still the Pokemon games have sold more copies than both of these games combined. Pokemon games coming out more frequently is more beneficial for Game Freak because it's literally helping their business. It shows that they're more profitable than the games that take longer to make. But if you do this long term, I speculate that this could potentially damage the Pokemon brand. I know this game has a lot of controversy, and I know there's a debate on whether there's stolen assets. While these claims have been proven false, I feel like most people who are looking into this stuff too heavily are sort of missing the point. Palworld is actually challenging Pokemon. They challenged Game Freak so much they had to respond. When has that ever happened, guys? And their response was, yeah, we know about it. Stop asking us about it, all right? It's like, okay, all right. They literally did this the month Palworld came out, and it popped off that fast. When has this ever happened? They literally created an actual competition for Pokemon. They took a bit of their market share and hype for the game. They made the game that's basically the cost of a Switch era DLC, and it's not even finished. It's just Pokemon with guns, yeah. Is it the most, unique Pokemon game? No, it definitely is not. Is it using a lot of elements from previous games? Yeah, it definitely is. Sprinkle in a little Fortnite, Minecraft, Elden Ring, yes. But again, I think people who are trying to fight valiantly in honor of Pokemon as a brand are sort of missing the point that competition is a good thing. Is the game maybe lacking originality? Yeah, sure. Are there clear knockoffs of real Pokemon? Definitely. Knockoffs is technically not something that you aren't allowed to do. Plenty of games start off as knockoffs of previous games. Back in the day, Street Fighter II was very popular. It was so popular, there was plenty of games trying to milk the hype. And they're all allowed to exist because that's just the way it was and the way it still is. Some of these series are still around to this day and were obviously inspired by Street Fighter. I mean, look at Fighter's history, Bloodstorm. Even King of Fighters, you could say, is definitely inspired by Street Fighter. Fighter history even got sued by Capcom by, yeah, you know what, the similarities so obvious between these two games. I mean, look at these sprites. I mean, just like, they're gonna lose, right? This is a cut and dry case. I mean, you can't tell me this isn't Zangief. Well, guess what? Capcom lost the suit. Even look at Back 4 Blood for an obvious spin on the Left 4 Dead concept. It was even created by the original creators of Left 4 Dead, Turtle Rock Studios. But the point is, a lot of games are clearly inspired by other games, or borderline copy them at times. It's been a thing for decades. Could Palworld be more original? Yes, I definitely agree. The actual difficult thing though is when you make a copy, make a game so big it's so hard to ignore. And they're actually able to compete with what they're inspired by. We will have to see about Palworld's long-term success, and I won't lie, this is possibly the most beneficial thing to happen to the Pokemon franchise because competition is good. If we only had access to one gaming console line, we wouldn't have had other brands existing to try to beat each other and overall make better products for the consumers. You bet your bottom dollar competition lights fire under companies' behinds because it makes them work harder. I mean, I think the fact that Palworld in its current form has a much smaller team than the mega company that is Game Freak. They made arguably the same level, if not better quality game with the same amount of development time as Game Freak with much less money. And yet they truly expanded on the original concept and now have even more dynamic combat. Look at the unique animations the Pals have, and I know Pokemon has, you know, the much bigger roster for sure, so making animations is definitely more time consuming. It took Scarlet and Violet's DLC period to give Pokemon actually unique quality animations, and when the game launched, a lot of these animations looked lifeless. This is what a lot of people have sort of imagined Pokemon could be in the future. I remember these speculation periods even 10 years ago of what Pokemon would look like 10 years forward, and here we are. I feel like they've taken small steps forward on the concept of open world Pokemon, but then when they do take those steps forward, it ends up being buggy at times. Is the game perfect? No, it is far from perfect. It's not even finished. But to be honest, you're paying half the price for what Pokemon games cost at launch. And you're actually getting a more creative experience that's something Pokemon hasn't really done in a long time. And usually when they do, you know, there ends up being problems. Even Legends Arceus, which in my opinion is probably the best Pokemon game that we've had in the Switch era. However, I will say, the development period of those games was so stressful it made them outsource the Gen 4 remakes to another company. Yeah, we got probably some of the worst mainline Pokemon games of all time. You hate to see it, honestly. This is me trying to give this series a sort of bit of tough love. When I was a kid, people were basically saying the games that I like and grew up with were bad. I know some people might say, well, I like Scarlet and Violet, I grew up with these games, I like Sword and Shield. Notice how I didn't bring up the Pokemon designs and actually talk about the quality of the games, the content that's available, and what you're paying for. I don't want this to be like a subjective, like I don't like the gen that has, you know, the sand castle Pokemon and that's dumb. No, I actually like that Pokemon. But to be real, I don't think the quality is the same as what it used to be. I'm just worried it's going to become the Call of Duty of the Pocket Monster collecting RPGs, and I'm worried if they continue this long term, it could hurt their brand. See, when I was a kid, people used to see Pokemon, Mario, and Zelda as the Nintendo big three franchises when it came to quality. Even Mario Wonder won a lot of people over that were totally fatigued on the 2D Mario platformer. And then Mario Wonder came out and it won a lot of people over, including myself. I wasn't the hugest fan of a lot of 2D Mario games up until that point, and then they actually upgraded the experience and made the games better, and it benefited from it. I feel like Pokemon as a series needs to take a note from that. Thank you guys for watching the video. There's a Patreon down below if you guys want to get videos early and you want to support the channel in any way. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Hopefully you guys have a good one. Take care.